Okay, welcome everyone. I think we'll get started now. We'll start slow. Of course, because this is a series, I'm counting on some of the people that have attended previous sessions to feel that they can join a little bit late and they won't be missing anything. So, welcome everyone. My name is Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session in our six-part Transitioning to a Circular Economy webinar series. Today, we will be discussing the circular economy in the context of packaging value chains. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. First of all, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you after the session is over. We're aiming to have it available within 48 hours, so not immediately, but it will be on its way soon. We are in webinar mode, and that means that attendees will not be able to unmute. However, we are still really keen to hear from you, and there are two channels for that. Firstly, if you have a question for our panelists, then we would like you to put that through the Q&A box that you will find at the bottom of your screen. And then it's really important that we have your support with upvoting the questions that you're most keen to have us answer. I'm just seeing the folks saying there's some difficulties logging in, which would explain. It looks like it's picking up now, so whatever that problem was, hopefully it's resolved. Thanks for letting us know. We'll see if we can figure out what might be going on there. I don't think we're doing anything different. Okay, back to the housekeeping. So Q&A box, that's where the questions for the panelists need to go. And please keep an eye on that box yourself. And if you see a question that you're really keen to have answered, click on the thumbs up. That will move it up to the top of the list for us. And almost, well, I can't say make any guarantees, but it definitely will improve the likelihood that we'll be able to put that question to our esteemed panelists. If you just want to comment, if you want to say hi from Brussels or hi from wherever you are and tell us about the weather or share your LinkedIn profile, please do that in the chat. We're really keen to have you active in the chat. And so by all means, use it. If you've got something to share, that's the place to share it. But don't put questions in there for our panelists. We are not allowed by Zoom to post into the Q&A box ourselves. So if you post a question into the chat box, we can't move it. As you'll see, once it starts to roll over, it's just not possible for me to keep an eye on the chat to catch questions that go in there inadvertently. We've activated the automatic captions. There's a button at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to activate them for yourself. Do bear in mind that the captions are generated automatically by Zoom, so we ask your forgiveness for any typos or mistakes that the program makes. And finally, if you'd like to post on social media about the session, what you're hearing, we certainly encourage that. Please tag us, and our details will be in the chat momentarily. And also please use the hashtag T2CE 2023, transition to a circular economy 2023. That would be much appreciated again. So thanks very much for doing that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide and just a brief introduction to the UN Global Compact. We are the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative with more than 20,000 participating companies globally. Our initiative is built on a foundation of 10 universal principles for responsible business that have been drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. To join our initiative requires a commitment from your CEO to operationalize our principles throughout your organization, to report annually on your progress towards this end, and to support the wider UN agenda. Our role as a Global Compact network is to support participating companies to fulfill these commitments, and we do that by organizing lots of events like this over the course of the year to inspire and enable corporate sustainability. I can see we have quite a few folk joining the call from around the world. And so let me also add that we have Global Compact networks in over 100 countries now. So there's a very good chance that we have colleagues working wherever you're working, and they would love to hear from you. So do please get in touch if we can help connect you to your local Global Compact network. And similarly, if you're not already participating here in the UK, then definitely get in touch with us. We'd love to have a chat. Okay, next slide, please. I mentioned that one of the commitments we ask of our participating companies is to support the wider UN development agenda, the wider UN agenda. And that is best represented right now by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we want to make sure that you understand how all of our work is connected into driving that. It's a really big part of our mission to see business making an important contribution to the goals. The goals provide a comprehensive and coherent roadmap to create the future we want. So I encourage you to think about how your work impacts the SDGs. And to that end, I just want to flag that today's session is particularly linked to Goal 12, which calls on us to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. But of course, the goals are quite interlinked, and several more are highly relevant. And then, of course, with not a whole lot of mental effort, you could connect this topic to just about every one of the goals. So let's keep that in mind, just how far-reaching today's conversation could be. Okay, let's go on to the next slide and we'll talk about today's session. We're going to be focusing on circularity for packaging. Plastic packaging is attracting a lot of attention from business, government, and media, and rightly so. Globally, at current rates, plastic packaging is expected to more than quadruple by 2050 to 318 million tons per year. This amount of plastic presents significant environmental and social risks with regard to plastic waste, the release of greenhouse gas emissions and toxic additives into the environment, and continued reliance on fossil fuel resources. However, simply switching from plastics to other materials does not guarantee improved environmental and social outcomes. This is well documented. Other alternatives may be heavier or less durable, creating different forms of waste, different forms of environmental impacts. It's just not that straightforward. So companies need to work to reduce their overall material consumption and really importantly, understand the impacts of different materials over their entire life cycle. The principles of a circular economy offer ways in which to manage the related social and environmental impacts of packaging. However, the barriers remain in place, such as lack of incentives to design for reuse and recycling, accessibility of inexpensive virgin oil-based plastics, and the lack of availability of alternative materials with a comparable price and functionality. To help us understand how we can overcome some of the key barriers and accelerate the transition to sustainable packaging, we are joined today by a fantastic panel of speakers. Krzysztof Krajewski, I'm sorry, Krzysztof, if even with practice, I think I got it wrong. The Director of Packaging Sustainability at Reckitt is with us. Samantha Upham, Sustainability Business Partner for Sales, Marketing, and Innovation at DS Smith is joining us, and Helen Bird, Head of Business Collaboration at WRAP. Three brilliant experts that are going to share their wisdom, and also, we're all keen to help you with questions once we get to the Q&A. So we're going to hear briefly from each of our speakers. Then we're going to go to Q&A. By all means, please start firing your questions into the Q&A box, and please start voting for the ones you want us to answer. And let me just head off one question that we seem to always get, and I'll remind you again that yes, the session is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you when it's done. Okay, without any further ado, Krzysztof, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a great day, and also the audio sounds well. We had some technical issues in the in a setup session. So hopefully everything runs smoothly right now. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored, and thank you for the invitation, Steve, and the team. It's very great to be here. My name is Krzysztof Krajewski, as mentioned by Steve. I work in the hygiene part of the business of Reckitt, and my role is to make sure that all our packaging operations within the unit are meant to be sustainable and more sustainable with every new innovation versus the predecessor. So we are transforming our base portfolio, but also innovating through sustainability. And this is because we have stated our sustainability ambitions. And within the sustainability ambitions, we have 3 pillars. And number 1 is purpose-led brands. And here you have the plastic sort of pledge ambitions, which is speaking about 100% of packaging to be recyclable or reusable by 2025, 25% recycled content inclusion by 2025 to close the loop for circularity, and 50% reduction of virgin plastics by 2030. So this is a bit longer because we seen this is a bit more complicated task. But the other pillars of our ambitions are healthier planet and fairer society. In healthier planet, we for example, I will not go through all of them, but for example, in healthier planet, we have a target to reduce 50% absolute reduction in product carbon footprint by 2030 with the baseline of 2015. So I just brought this particular one additional target because it has a link with packaging targets and plastic targets. So this is as an intro. If we go to the next slide, please, I explain to you who Reckitt really is. I'm sure you know those brands. We are a little bit over 200 years on the market with 3 business units, and the products you see and the brands you see on the screen, they're representing the business unit focus. So we have hygiene, and that's brands like Finish, Airwick, Vanish, Calgon, Woolite, Harpic, and so on. But you also see the health and nutrition. Health like Nurofen, Strepsils, and baby milk formulation from 2016. So that's on the nutrition side. I'm sure you are familiar with those brands. So today I would like to bring one point for the discussion. I mean, sustainability, is it one leap? Is it one change? Is it the ultimate goal to be sustainable? Or we should be more and more sustainable along the way by drafting our long-term plans and the roadmaps. So the way how we see it in packaging sustainability at Reckitt is that every brand should plan their own path. And there's no path for everyone being the same path. Some brands will be having more impact on one side, like very heavy on plastic. Some brands will be on flexible formats, so may have issues on recyclability. Therefore, the path should be different, and you should compare not across the average, but you should compare with your previous footprint and how you can do better. And sometimes, this journey will be bumpy. Yes, and sometimes one lever will be going up, one lever will be going down. For example, you reduce packaging, you reduce plastic, you reduce carbon emissions, but your recyclability profile may be impacted. On the next step, you improve your recyclability profile. Once your packaging is recyclable, you start adding PCR. Therefore, there is a certain logic, step by step on our journey towards 2025, 2030. So also the business will have a chance to adapt to our changes. On the next slide is the example which we recently launched, paper-based pouch for Finish, which used to be a plastic packaging. It still contains a little bit of plastic on the inside coating, but in principle, it's designed for recyclability with paper stream. And the journey has been quite long. Since 2017, 2016, we've been through several steps of changes. So this is the latest step we have done with this product range. And the flexibles used to be non-recyclable laminates, polyester with polyethylene, so not recyclable because of the two different plastics being bonded together, not being able to be disconnected for the recycling. In 2019, we have launched our first recyclable pouch, which was a mono material, monopolyethylene structure with the help of our partner Dow. Those mono materials, they were really highly acclaimed. 2019, that were one of the first pioneering technologies in the mono materials. And 2021, we added PCR to it. So we closed the loop by adding 30% PCR, further reduce the carbon footprint emissions. We know that there's less carbon footprint on the recycled than on the virgin material. So we went towards this path. But then we suddenly saw a sort of a showstopper. There's no more big carbon saving anymore. We save by changing to recyclable, technically recyclable materials, but recyclability is very, very low for flexible plastics. We're hearing from many places that flexible plastics, we cannot recycle our way out from it. So likely we need to use other options. So in this step, we have seen we prioritize reduce, and we reduce 75% of plastic. And that will result in about 2,000 tons less plastic waste. We used the calculation in all of the scenarios before and after with different scenarios of end of life, because there will be end of life. Even for a perfectly recyclable rigid packaging, you still have a waste to landfill because recycling is not 100% when you speak about the scale. It's almost zero when you speak about flexible plastics. So that was the basics. So there was the movement behind going to flexible paper-based materials. And it's also contributing to our 50% carbon reductions by 2030. So let me give you a little bit more insights about the journey we've been through. And on the next slide, don't take it for granted. We are still in the process. We are still learning, and we are still in the peer review LCA. So what the numbers I'm giving you today is just for orientation, right? So here it goes. You see on the right-hand slide is the roadmap. So LDPE PET, the non-recyclable, that was 2019, which I mentioned before. Then the recyclable, and then the 30% PCR added. You see, we are reducing carbon emissions, and we reduced like 12%, then cumulatively to 18%, and that was it. And then when you add another 34%, you are overall reducing 48% of carbon emissions. If you look on your benchmark, which was the starting point with non-recyclable LDPE PET. So that is very, very close to our ambition of 50% carbon reduction by 2030. So this is perhaps, it may be a bit controversial, because even non-recyclable one, you see there's a big gap. There's a big gap in the carbon reduction. And there's no big difference from non-recyclable to recyclable. This is just a two scenario. So the two boxes or two bars at the far side on the right is the same structure. It's the paper-based with the plastic coating. But depending on the country we launch, it may be or may not be recyclable, but you still see there's a benefit from carbon perspective, because the end of life incineration is a very big factor, especially for plastics, because plastics burn longer. It will result in more CO2 because it's still will be incinerated to a high degree, even if technically recyclable. So that's the biggest factor which we have learned, and this is also one of the reasons why we focus so much on the reduction as a first priority. So with that, I would thank you very much for attention, and I'm very happy to pick up the challenge and answer some of your questions, and perhaps having a small debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And over
Krzysztof.
to Steve.
Thank you, Krzysztof. You have certainly prompted lots of questions, which is most appreciated. Thanks very much to our audience for getting that going and for all the activity in the chat. Really like to see that. Don't forget to give a thumbs up to the questions you'd like us to prioritize when we get to that part of the show after we hear from first Samantha and then Helen. Samantha, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. And thank you for the invitation to join the panel discussion today. And hello to all of you. It's great to see so many from across the globe coming onto our call today. I'm the Sustainability Business Partner at DS Smith, and my role is to drive the delivery of our now and next sustainability strategy across our business. Next slide, please. For those who are not familiar with DS Smith, we are a leading manufacturer of sustainable packaging solutions, and we're Europe's largest paper and cardboard recycler. DS Smith was founded in London in the 1940s, and since then we've expanded across Europe and North America, experiencing rapid growth. And today our business is made up of three core divisions: packaging, paper, and recycling. And the bigger we become, the more our customers are expecting from us and the more we expect of ourselves. And we have a relentless desire to improve and to innovate. And leading the way in sustainability is one of our strategic goals. We're committed to transitioning to a circular economy, and within our now and next sustainability strategy, we have an ambition for all our packaging to be recycled by 2030. And it's our activity towards this that I will be sharing with you today. Next slide, please. So the circular economy is an area where we felt we are already strong, and it's an area where we felt we could be strong for our customers as well. And this is because at DS Smith, we have a circular business model, and it's intrinsic to our operations. Our integrated recycling, paper, and packaging divisions enable us to make billions of products from fiber-based materials we gather, achieving a box-to-box in 14 days. And what that means is that the cardboard collected from our customers can be processed for recycling, made into new paper, and converted into cardboard packaging again, all within 14 days. And our simple business model makes us different to other waste and recycling collectors because we do not operate landfill sites. We're solely focused on recycling. And as a manufacturer of packaging, it's natural for us to see waste as a raw material. And our goal is to drive waste away from landfill and into more sustainable processes. And this also helps our customers achieve more in their circular economy ambitions with minimal impact to the environment. And by closely collaborating with our customers, we're able to develop and deploy closed-loop management systems for waste streams that we handle. Next slide, please. So our ambition for all our packaging that we produce to be recycled by 2030 is one of our next sustainability targets. It's set there in the longer term. Though in order to achieve it, we acknowledged there were a number of actions we needed to take now to lay those foundations to put us in a good position to be able to achieve that longer target. First, we asked ourselves if our packaging was fit for purpose in the recycling systems of the countries in which our products are placed. So step one in our journey was making sure first and foremost that the packaging we're putting out into the market is recyclable in standard waste streams, because if it's not, then it's not going to get recycled. And that led us to set the target to manufacture 100% reusable or recyclable fibre-based packaging by 2023. And we did that by analysing the portfolio of each of our packaging manufacturing sites at product level to assess whether it met our criteria. And where it didn't, we innovated and redesigned to make these products compliant using our circular design metrics to communicate to our customers the positive impact this had. And I'm proud to say we actually achieved our 2023 target 1 year ahead of schedule. But it's also not just our packaging, it's also everyone else's. So we have engaged brand owners as well, and we continue to do so, to bring them into our paper mills, testing their materials for recyclability in our lab and guiding them towards more recyclable packaging in general. And these two approaches combined is helping us tackle the recyclability challenge at product level. In addition to this, we also wanted to clarify what we actually meant by closed-loop recycling. In a nutshell, we define closed-loop recycling as a process where waste, or resources as we like to call it, is collected, recycled, and then used again to make the same product it came from. Nowadays, there's a number of different recycling or recovery options available to keep resources in the economy for as long as possible. Open loop recycling or downcycling is one such method where products and materials are turned into new products of lesser quality or reduced functionality. And such open loop recycling solutions can be the best option for many companies as it can divert waste from landfill or incineration. But to achieve rural longevity for our resources, we wanted to look at tighter closed loop solutions. Next slide, please. So one such example I wanted to share with you today is the Cotswold Co., a furniture company that's been trading for over 25 years. They've collaborated with us to create a longer-term environmental roadmap as part of their own commitment to reducing the impact on the environment. Customers can now take advantage of their packaging removal service, whereby all cardboard packaging is taken from the customer's home upon delivery. And this material is returned to the distribution centre where it's baled and collected by DS Smith Recycling. And then that baled cardboard is delivered to a DS Smith paper mill for pulping. And this finished paper is converted back into new corrugated cardboard packaging. This approach not only improves recycling rates, but it supports the company's environmental ambitions. And it also ensures that customers are receiving a more sustainable offering. So it's a win-win and has come to pass because we both share that ambition of creating a circular economy and have taken action to move closer towards it. Next slide, please. So how do we take a successful case study localized to one country and scale that solution across all other customers and across borders? And for that, we need systemic change. If we put products out in the market that can be easily collected and recycled, it helps design a system that is more efficient and effective. And a system change is what is required because it moves beyond the product and exploring infrastructures that enable closed loop systems to operate successfully. We're working with industry bodies, with governing bodies, with NGOs to drive this as we cannot achieve this by ourselves. We need to partner with the right stakeholders to deliver this ambition. And we're doing a lot of advocating, advising and influencing policymakers on recyclability design, collection systems, including our campaign to source segregate to deliver that higher quality packaging for recycling to improve those overall recyclability standards. And we're taking a lead in those conversations with brand owners, but also with trade associations such as Forever Green, who has a goal to raise the recycling rate of fibre-based packaging to 90% by 2030. And so, like us, are committed to developing systems that support recycling across the board here in the UK, but also across mainland Europe to ensure that we're all moving in the same direction. And harmonisation will boost recycling rates in the countries in which we sell our packaging solution, which in turn supports delivery of our own 2030 ambition. The Cotswold Co., although a very small example, is a good example of what can be achieved, and it demonstrates that it can be done. So when we're looking at a bigger system, such as scaling it up to larger, fast-moving consumer goods companies, where our products are more widely dispersed into supermarkets, into corner shops, at home through e-commerce, it becomes a very different challenge. So we also have to look at the wider system of how we can track and trace products when there isn't such an immediate return. And this is where we see technology and data playing a part in the tracking of material to be able to measure the success of closed loops. And those technologies include traceable markers, QR codes, near-infrared and robotics. There's a lot of activity in this area that can help provide the traceability needed to demonstrate that closed loops are working. And by implementing closed loops, there's a lot less leakage of materials into the natural environment. If we know how much we're putting out into the market and then we can track how much we're getting back, it provides us with the opportunity to further improve the system to prevent leakage if there is still a gap. So we might not be able to prove that every single box gets recycled and ends up back in our own paper mills. That's probably a step too far, but we want to be able to confidently say to customers, we know your packaging has been recycled, even if it's at somebody else's mill. And this is what collective systemic change would look like if we know that the packaging has been recycled and we've got confirmation of that through data tracking, then that should be good enough because it's the right thing to do and it's working in the best interests of the planet. So we continue to do a lot of work in the background to influence the system. and on how we will evidence that 100% of the fibre we place on the market is recovered through closed-loop solutions. And these are the levers we are using, and it gives you a flavour of what we're doing. We recognise that it's very ambitious and it requires a massive systemic change. A lot of that is out of our control, but we do believe that by collectively working towards a future where paper is the sustainable packaging solution of choice, and a future whereby all paper-based packaging is collected and recycled, we're just that one step closer towards that true circular economy. Thank you for listening, and back to Steve.
Thank you, Samantha. Great stuff. That's really refreshing to see that level of ambition. As challenging it is, it's I think it's important that we reach high. And I really love what you guys are doing. I have a whole bunch of questions, and obviously so does everyone else. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. Ever more important, everybody, that you get in there and give thumbs up to the questions that you like the looks of. If they come in for Helen the way they've come in for Krzysztof and Samantha, we probably won't get through them all. So we will need your help in ranking them. And then again, a friendly reminder, questions that you post in the chat are going to be hypothetical questions. If you want me to present them to the panelists, you do need to post them into the Q&A box. Okay, and now without any more delay, Helen, over to you.
Thank you, and a very good day to you, to all of you beaming in from all over the world, which is super exciting and great that we can come together and collaborate in this space. So thank you for having me here today. So I am from a global NGO wrap, and our vision is a thriving world in which climate change is no longer a problem. And I head up our voluntary agreement programme, including an initiative called the UK Plastics Pact, which was the first of now a global network of plastics pacts. And I've been asked to come here today to talk with you and discuss about citizen behaviour change, how businesses can support that, but also how we can support people to better understand packaging and waste, and specifically to touch on plastics. So really looking forward to the panel and your questions. So I'll be brief so that we can, as brief as I possibly can be in such a massive topic, so that we can get to that point. So the next slide outlines our vision statement for the UK Plastics Pact, and indeed underpins the mission for all of the plastics pacts and the globally. And I think this actually talks to the point that's come up in a number of the questions about unintended consequences. And really our vision for the UK Plastics Pact is a world where plastic is valued and doesn't pollute the environment. But critical to this is our underpinning vision of our organisation, which is about climate action. So ensuring that we don't have those unintended consequences. And on the next slide, we outline the targets that we have here in the UK. They're slightly different depending on the nations. And I think, as someone highlighted in the chat, that different nations are a different starting point on this journey. But what we're targeting in the UK is for elimination of all unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging items. We're shooting for 100% of plastic packaging to be recyclable, compostable or reusable by 2025, to achieve a 70% recycling rate and an average of 30% recycled content of packaging across the membership. And I sometimes think that, you know, if you set targets and people don't look at you like you're a bit crazy, then perhaps your targets are not stretching enough. So this is really our ambition of shooting for the stars. And there are some critical success factors really to enable us to get anywhere close to that target. One of those success factors is having a critical mass of membership. So the members of the UK Plastics Pact account for 2/3 of all consumer packaging. And that's essentially around 90% of what we would buy every day as citizens in the UK. And it's also critically underpinned by government. And we firmly believe that the actions that are necessary to achieve these targets is a combination of both government and business combined with the citizen. But we don't have to wait for government action, so business can act well ahead of regulation. And I'll come to our progress ahead of those regulations slightly later on. In the next slide, just want to, I suppose, touch on citizen behaviour change and our theory of change that we have at RAP. And what we believe firmly is that citizens need to be able to they need to have both the information and the motivation and the tools to enable them to change their behaviour. And changing behaviour is extremely difficult, as many of you will probably have experienced in your businesses. But what needs to happen in order to catalyse what we call moments of transformation in citizen behaviour is a culmination of actions across partners, whether they be businesses, local government, wider government, innovators and NGOs, all the actions that are necessary also within governments, and the citizen actions themselves, which are enabled frequently by business. And I thought it might be helpful to bring that to life a little bit. So the next slide outlines some work that we have done around the relationship between plastic packaging and food waste in the home, focusing on fresh produce, so fruit and vegetables. And we did a research study that identified that actually counter to what we had thought originally is that plastic packaging can actually, in this very specific case, actually exacerbate food waste. And exacerbates it because people may buy a whole sack of potatoes when they actually only wanted to buy a handful, and they would use a handful. So by removing the plastic packaging, it results in the benefit of saving the food waste of the potatoes, but it also saves the plastic packaging as well. So but in order for that to become a reality, what we need is for business to remove that plastic packaging while also engaging people to purchase those items, because the sad reality is that in the UK, at least, is that if you were to give most people the option of whether or not they buy packaged or unpackaged fruit or vegetables, they would choose the packaged option. So we have a whole work stream on this, which is ramping up over the course of the next couple of years, and we've set ambitious targets for the retailers, which are highlighted here on screen. The next slide dips in a little bit about recyclability, and one of the actions that we've taken here at RAP is defining, well, what are the good plastics, inverted commas, versus the bad plastics when it comes to recyclability. And you are working with partners to ensure that the businesses within the UK are adopting those guidelines to support the recyclability. And a really important point here is that when we're talking about packaging being recyclable, we're not talking about technically recyclable, we're talking about what's practical and recycled at scale, which takes me on to the next point in the next slide about how we increase recycling. So enabling something to be recyclable requires it to be collected for recycling, people to participate, the infrastructure to be there, and of course the end markets. And there's a whole range of things that need to happen in parallel to achieve that. So one I just wanted to highlight is on-pack labelling, is that we know that that's something that is super important to help cut through on confusion, and having real clear and consistent labelling is really important. In here, in the UK, we partner with an organisation called the On-Pack Recycling Labelling Organisation, and we really champion their approach in very, very clear labelling, and would encourage that. It's sort of a global system for that. And coming to plastic film or soft plastics, most people, by the way, in the UK call them plastic bags and wrapping, while in industry we talk about plastic film. And in the UK, the collections for that material is very, very limited by local authorities. Now that's set to change in coming years, so people will be able to recycle them directly from their homes. But in the meantime, under the Plastics Pact, we've given direction to the supermarkets to set up collection points. So there are now 5,000 collection points across the UK where people are able to take those items. But it's important, of course, to make sure that the infrastructure is there to support it, and critically, the end markets. And on to the next slide, talking of end markets, is increasing recycled content. And all of the targets of the UK Plastics Pact work in harmony with each other. Often people forget the whole point of recycling is to enable recycled content, not necessarily in packaging, of course, but that is absolutely the utopia. So we set targets to achieve our average of 30% by 2025. And all the actions that we do under the Plastics Pact are taken by businesses ladder to this target. And of course, depending on which nation you're in, the amount of recycled content you can achieve in your packaging will largely be dependent on the collection of that material, which of course relies on the engagement with citizens to achieve that. And finally, on the next slide, where have we got to? So we believe that transparency is incredibly important. We encourage our business members to report individually, but what we do at RAP is we collate all of their data, we monitor their progress annually to make sure that they're delivering on their promises as they've signed up to the targets. So we've achieved significant reduction in the elimination of unnecessary. So 84% of the items that we identified originally as being unnecessary have been reduced. And on our last target on recycled content, we've now achieved an average industry level of 22%, which is more than double since we initiated the pact. We're struggling a little bit around on design for recyclability and struggling on the proportion of packaging that's classified as being recyclable. And the reason for that is because of the lag in the collections of plastic film, because only when it's collected can we classify it as being recyclable and recycled. So I know that there's loads of questions in the chat, which I'm excited to get to. So I think let's leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, Helen. Yes, loads of questions indeed. So let me make one final plea. Maybe not the final, but we've got almost 300 people on this call, and our most voted for question has only got 23 votes. So the other almost 277 of you, do please get in there, have a look, and give a thumbs up to the questions that you like the look of. I think it's frankly improbable that we're going to get through all 39 questions that have been presented. So we're going to have to make some choices. Let's all now, Krzysztof, if you would turn on your camera. Oh, there you are. Great. I see you now. Let's get started. A question that, and I'm gonna take my moderator's privilege to begin. A question that you've all sort of touched on it, but I'd like to revert to it a little bit, is this idea of, in my mind, the difference between recyclable and recycled. And I think we've all experienced the frustration of bringing some product home, and all of the packaging is marked, is labeled as recyclable, and none of it is recyclable where I live. And it's hugely frustrating. And I'm thinking a simple analysis might put the blame on the local council for not investing in the necessary facilities. But I suspect that's overly simple. And really refreshing, Samantha, that you guys are to some extent owning this. Although, to be fair, your materials may be a little easier to deal with than soft plastics would be. Where do we? So maybe Helen, you could start on this. I'm just curious that just around where do we see the responsibility falling here between public sector, the company producing the packaging, the company whose goods are being packaged, and the person who's made the purchase. How do we share out that responsibility? And maybe, Helen, if you could, just a little bit more about the changes you alluded to around soft plastics in terms of capacity coming online.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think a starting point to the point you first made, Steve, is about that frustration that we've all felt when we have a piece of packaging, we take it home, it says recyclable, but actually we can't do that. I think the first point is that any company needs to take this extremely seriously and make sure that they're not greenwashing their customers. So it's that they need to understand what actually is recycled at scale in order to understand whether or not it can carry a recyclable mark on their packaging. In the UK, we are super lucky and to have an organisation called APRL, which we work extremely closely in partnership with, so that they can do the legwork to understand with us what does the collection landscape look like, and therefore what's the likelihood that people can actually recycle that item, and so therefore which label, what does the packaging say. So I think that's the first point, but that responsibility, and I think that in the UK the government are catching up on this and are starting to come down. There's a number of companies which have been held to account on the labels that they have on their packaging. So that's a big watch out. And of course, I think in terms of whose responsibility is it, and this will come down to I suppose the local. When I talk about local, I mean local countries, their mandates for collections, and it's my view that the government needs to mandate that in each country of which materials are going to be collected to support the development of the infrastructure to catch up with that, because of course something's only recyclable if it can be collected for recycling. I say that, but we don't have to wait, as I illustrated in my presentation. So soft plastics, or plastic bags and wrapping, as people call that type of plastic, that is coming down the line in the UK in 2027. So by that time, all local authorities will be obligated to collect that material. But by the way, not all of it. So it has to meet the right design criteria in order for it to carry the label to say that it's recyclable. And I think that mandate is also really, really important. But the plastic crisis issue is now, it's not 3-4 years down the line. So actually providing a pathway for people who are, it's going to be the really willing people who will be taking their bags and wrapping to the big supermarkets. But it does at least provide that opportunity. And with recycling, there can be a bit of a chicken and egg situation where you need the collection of the material to start driving the infrastructure, but you need the infrastructure in order to recycle it. So it's not perfect. It's far from perfect, but we're at least at the beginning of the journey, and it sets us on the right trajectory so that when curbside collections come down the line and the amount of material that's being collected is significantly higher, we've started that process of investing in the infrastructure. And actually the collections through supermarkets has resulted in direct investment in that infrastructure. So an example is Morrison's, one of our supermarkets in the UK, and Nestle, a manufacturer that you will all know, have invested directly in a soft plastics recycler in Scotland help with processing the material.
Thanks, Helen. Krzysztof, do you want to comment on this? Not forcing you, but it does feel like I suspect you've thought about this.
It does feel like I suspect you've thought about this.
Yeah, no, I think there is a small delay, so you may expect 3 seconds delay in my response. Apologies for that. Actually, not in my force to control that. Well, I agree with what has been said, with what Helen mentioned about the efforts towards circularity. And the chicken and egg situation is clearly the moment when you need to decide and think what is the most probable scenario for the future. Because we know this is evolving. We know that certain industries will change and morph from one material to another, and industry will be building up and developing in certain directions. One technology will win or the other technology. Which train will be faster in its destination? This is a little bit of a future telling, in which your bet on the right technology is the one which is driving the circularity. So this was mainly also the reason when we launched in 2019 the monomaterial polyethylene bags, when there was zero almost collection. There was just the very first front of store collection in Tesco at this time, and it was technically recyclable, but still the percentage of recyclability is very, very low. Should you say it is recyclable, or it's designed for recycling, or future-proofed for recycling? You are betting on it, and in future it will be recycled. Whether it will be, we hope it will be, but many things may change in future, right? So it requires a courage, it requires a sort of a bravery that everybody will be betting on the same thing, but otherwise we go different directions. So that's my thought around the circularity and how we should drive it. And in the company like ours, when you have a packaging development team with with the resources as we got a number of packaging engineers in-house, and the time we have here, we need to prioritize. And so we look on our portfolio. How much plastic do we have, for example? Let's say 200,000 metric tons, and then we look, where is our biggest plastic footprint, where we can make the biggest impact. We measure our projects by metric tons. So we are not necessarily focusing on the projects which might have big importance for the industry, for the future replaceability of flexibles, whereas our biggest footprint is on rigid bottles. So we need to make sure that we don't destroy recycling for rigid packs, where our biggest plastic footprint is sitting and where the recycling is the most advanced. But in the same time, we need to stimulate the future growth for other formats, such as flexible plastics, as said. Recycled, as you mentioned, the ultimate proof of recyclability is to get recycled. So if you don't have PCR content in your packaging, it's not really fair to say that it is recyclable if you don't recycle yourself and reuse recycled content back into your products. Therefore, recyclable and recycled always needs to go hand in hand, and that's how we were doing. And actually, if your packaging is non-recyclable, like the example which I was showing to you, 2018 before 2019, laminate of polyester with polyethylene, non-recyclable, it doesn't make really sense to add PCR to structure which is non-recyclable. So first step was to make it recyclable, and then the next step, 2 years later, we were adding PCR to close the loop. So recyclable was merged with recycled, and that's how we see it. And personally, I believe it needs to reach the thresholds of more than 50%, for the circle to start rolling. That will be it from now, from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Samantha, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things just to really build on what Krzysztof said. I agree. I think there's a tipping point between how much it is recycled. I mean, at the moment, at scale is kind of considered anything over 30%, but that does seem really quite low. And certainly, you know, when you look at things like glass and cans and even fiber-based packaging with paper, you know, the recycling rates of those are significantly higher. So it shows that it can be done when you've got the infrastructure and when you've got the investment into making it happen. But I think I'd like to take it a step back from what do we do at end of life and think more about what do we do at, you know, at the beginning of life, if you like, when it comes to the packaging itself. And I think, you know, to be able to make these systems and have the infrastructure and to make things more recyclable, then we need to design with that recyclability in mind. And we need to think about, you know, having as much as possible what we call mono material. So it's just a single material, so that when it goes into those waste streams, it's so much easier to recycle because it hasn't been mixed with anything else that might reduce the quality or the output of that recyclable material through that recycling process. So there's many steps, I think, along the chain where, you know, good design, good facilities, good consumer or business behavior, and actually physically recycling as well. All of these things really need to come together to be able to make sure that things are recycled in practice, not just in theory. And we've also started to see quite a few murmurings, I'd say, in the EU around, you know, can you just say something's recyclable when actually it isn't? And so before, for years, people are saying my product is recyclable, but as we've all said, it's not necessarily recycled. And now that term is very much becoming merged together. And you won't, I think, under greenwashing, it wouldn't surprise me in the coming years that you just can't say one without the other happening. You know, you can't just say it's recyclable and yet it isn't, because the facilities aren't there. I think those two will become merged, and you would need to make sure it is recycled at scale to be able to say it's recyclable.
You have to name the name but it's the example I imagine everybody's thinking of is Tetra Pak, which is such a popular packaging option. It's widely used and I think presented as recyclable, but requiring specialized equipment, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yes, it's not recyclable in what we would consider to be standard waste streams. It has to go through a chemical recycling process because often it has three materials. There's often you know, the paper outer. There will be a plastic liner, and if it's a product that needs to be chilled, there would potentially also be like an aluminium liner in there as well. And separating those three components is very challenging. Yeah, I think if we take the Morrison story recently of them moving from very recyclable in the UK plastic milk bottles to a Tetra Pak alternative, it does shift the scales on, you know, how recyclable are those products. So I think that we have to be very mindful when we are looking at new innovations of those unintentional consequences that, you know, it's a great phrase because, you know, you think sometimes that this looks like a great idea, but you really do need to follow that product all the way through its life cycle to really understand what the impact is going to be at the end of life, and making sure that it's not having some unintentional consequences there. And in an ideal world, everything would be mono material, would have recycling streams for every single type of packaging possible. Everything got recycled and made into new products. I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful? But I agree with, you know, my fellow panelists. I think that that's something we've got to work towards, but it is going to take a number of years to really get us there and to really see the improvements. And we really are probably going to be quite reliant on legislative changes to help force that issue.
I think we've set up, maybe even started answering the most popular question from Carolina. This question landed, Krzysztof, in response to your paper plastic packaging. Now, Samantha, while you have the microphone, I think you wanted to comment on this. So Carolina asks, how is the paper plastic pouch going to be recyclable with paper recycling? Isn't it going to contaminate the paper material? I think a question on many people's minds, because that certainly is counterintuitive. So Samantha, do you want to comment? And then Krzysztof, it'd be great to hear a little bit more of the technical side of this and how it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. From our perspective, as a recycler of fibre-based packaging, of course, we would prefer to have 100% paper-based old cases going through our mills. But the reality is that there are hybrid solutions out there on the market where it is fibre with something else. So with our sort of recyclable, making sure that we manufacture products and get it through, we do allow for a 5% tolerance of non-fibre materials to go through our standard mills, because we can still get the maximum yield of the paper, where fibre is around 95% or more of the overall pack. So with these new alternative innovations coming onto the market, is there an impact? Yes, there is a concern. That's why we're working with brand owners. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that we are discussing recyclability of these new innovations. We do a lot of testing in our mills to say, right, if that pack in that combination did come into our standard waste streams, what would happen to it? Is that going to cause a paper? Is that a complete no? Or is that yes, in small quantities it can be managed? So it is really about just looking at recognizing, I'd say, that it's tiny steps forward, and perhaps moving away from something that's completely not recyclable into something that is more recyclable is a transitional step. And then we must continue to innovate, as we have all been doing across the different industries, to find more solutions that can be recycled or compostable or biodegradable, to just try and improve that as we move forward. So from a paper side, we'd prefer to have mostly paper, but is the general trend moving towards paper products with some plastics in it? Absolutely. We've been working on new technologies to look at printing barriers rather than having plastic laminates, which is then completely dissolvable in our chain. So ultimately, it is just looking at those innovations and managing what's coming through and looking at the recyclability and just keeping that open conversation with ourselves and our customers and our brands on, what's the right packaging and what's the right fit for recyclability systems.
Thanks, Samantha. Krzysztof, would you like to tell us more about those pouches?
Yeah, no, I personally, I believe it's important to see the whole definition of recyclability. What drives, or what is the definition of recyclability? Yes, and there are 4 elements. It's a sorting. It's not the first one. So it needs to be collected, sorted, then reprocessed, and then reused. So there needs to be an application. So if you have a major failure on any of those 4 steps, your packaging will not be recyclable. If it's technically recyclable for the reprocessor, that's just that's just 25% of the journey, right? And if there is no collection at all, like flexible plastics is still struggling quite a bit, then can you say it's recyclable, right? Or it's designed for recycling in the future? And so it is extremely important that when you compare things, it's not 0, 1, it's not digital or white or black. It's very complicated, in fact. So you need to see what is your benchmark, right? I mean, my previous bag was recyclable, technically recyclable, but in fact, in practice, almost not. So the next packaging, you may ask why you have something on paper which is not great recyclable. And my benchmark was already very, very bad. You know what I mean? And I reduced 75% of plastic, and I reduced 34% of CO2, and I reduced the plastic to landfill, even if both are not recyclable. That means today, my focus is on reduction, right? So on the pyramid of 4 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. And especially for flexible plastics, this pyramid works, I believe, most. Yes, because the recycling is pretty down on this pyramid for flexible plastics. So it may change in the future, and we still need plastics. I'm not saying the plastics are we should all turn our heads from plastics right now and go to papers. Technically speaking, if you design it well, you can recover the fibers, right? So it needs to be solvable. You need to have all the inks and coatings on the outside. They shouldn't be stopping for dissolving the fibers. The fibers should be going to recycling and not be screened out in the rejects. There is a CEPI methodology, and now Forever Green is also leading the whole debate. You know, what should be the protocol for defining recyclability. So if you go through this protocol, you understand whether your fibers can be technically recyclable, and then the threshold, how much of other stuff, should that be plastic or anything else. It's not really about plastic. It's about the foreign thing, right? It's about the waste that paper recycler, they need to discharge as their own waste, which is their own cost to dispose, right? So it's not a technical factor. It's a more of an economical factor. And if you look on a bigger picture, you need to navigate between the problems of one industry versus the problems of another industry. You know what I mean? So just summarizing, when we are launching this product, we make sure that it's recyclable. But if it, in some places, if it will create a little bit of waste, we still believe it's worth, because of the reduction on carbon, reduction on plastic, and your alternative. There's not much alternative, right? Because the not yet, at least. Therefore, it's important to test various systems and be ready for various scenarios for the future. And as I said, it requires a little bit of a courage in which future you will believe in, right? Which direction it will go. I mean, certainly we shouldn't be closing any doors. So just to give you another insight, our machinery is ready to run both materials, and we will be able to go back if needed. You know, so don't be scared of changing your own strategies, right? And just need to observe how the environment is changing. If the next day, if next year, the collection of flexibles and plastics will grow massively, we will need to change that will be the right thing to change and steer to a slightly different direction. So so that's how I see it.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Helen, do you want to comment on this question? Shall we move on? I'm happy to hear your.
Well, I mean, I felt as though we were kind of leading a little bit into actually the question that Anita had put in about kind of thinking about actually the reduction, and I saw something coming through on the chat as well, and I think that what I think we're all in agreement as a panel, which is, you know, sorry about that, because sometimes it's good to have a bit of disagreement, but it's good to have the, you know, putting the waste hierarchy at kind of the top, in using that to enable our decision making.
Helen, I'm just going to interrupt. I'm going to read out the question from Anita, just in case there's people that don't have access to that, to the chat box, and then we'll circle back to you, because I think that's a great point. So Anita has written, from these presentations, it seems as though recovery and recyclability is the main driver for sustainable packaging. What about reusable packaging, such as refill on the go and recirculation of packaging? Seeing new legislation on elimination of single-use packaging, regardless of end-life processing. It would be nice to hear more from the panelists about how they are thinking about transitioning elimination of packaging designed for single-use, whether recycled, composted, or landfilled, incinerated. So that's a very interesting challenge. So thank you, Anita. And now, Helen, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, and apologies, Steve, for jumping straight in.
No, not at all. I think it's a great idea.
So I think Rap's stance on this is yes, Anita, and all of those of you who have given that thumbs up to this question, is we absolutely agree, and we do need to put that elimination at the very, very top of our priority. We're not going to be able to eliminate all of it or have everything in a reuse system, unlikely at this point in time. So we will always have an element that we need to recycle, but I absolutely agree. I think that extended producer responsibility is key to part of this. In the UK, it's going to add several zeros to the bill that business currently has in terms of the management of their packaging, and I think the feeling from business is actually that's a good thing as long as it's going to make the system work in the way that it should. And actually, I think that it will lead to a reduction. It should also bring in due course that carbon element. And the UK government have pledged that they will bring reuse into extended producer responsibility in 2025 as well. So I think in terms of that, that legislation direction, yes, I think we'll see more of that. But again, we don't have to wait. We should not wait for government action. The problem is now. So in the UK, what we're doing is we're encouraging businesses and supporting business to trial reuse systems. We've done a huge number of trials over the last few years, pulling together learnings from those trials. And our next stage is then development of blueprints for how do we actually get this working at scale, because it's the scale, it's the big brands, the big supermarkets who are going to make the massive difference. And we can only do that if we've got standardized systems to introduce it. And my personal view is that we need to focus where we can have the greatest impact, and where for citizens it's going to be the easiest thing to do. So I suppose that for products that you buy on a very ad hoc basis, the behavior change that we need, and that getting used to it, doing it all the time, if it's something that you only buy once a year or twice a year, we're not going to ingrain the reuse refill behaviors that we need. We need refill and reuse to be introduced into the everyday products that we're buying. And so that's our key focus at WRAP going forward, is convening industry to develop those blueprints.
Thanks, Helen. Krzysztof, I want to come to you on this, because obviously I agree with everything you're saying, but so much of this challenge now, we don't have retailers represented here. And I imagine, Krzysztof, you guys might have no objection to refillable packaging, but how are you going to get that space in a supermarket store, let alone on an Ocado truck? And how, with so many people having their shopping delivered these days, what's your view on reusable packaging, and is that something you're working on?
Yeah, well, I think Helen mentioned quite a fair challenge, right? That the certain products will have a more or less applicability for the refill and reuse models. And our products are not necessarily daily products. Some of them they will be, some of them not necessarily. When you think about our portfolio, we have quite broad range from hygiene products like Vanish and Finish. Maybe Finish you will use more of a daily. That's your dishwasher. You need to clean dishes every day. But Vanish, if you have a stain, maybe you will be using it every other week or a month if you have no stains at all. And so the product, the classification, and the value will drive the feasibility for this for those systems. We have actually trialed several of them, right? We 3 years ago, I believe, right from now, we launched Finish in the stainless steel as a part of Loop platform from TerraCycle. It was launched in also with partnership with Tesco. Similar exercise in France with Carrefour. Several other brands were trialing refill at home with a sort of drop-in solutions, when you have a concentrated monodose being dropped and then you fill up with the water, mix, shake it, and then reuse your old bottle. Some of those products have been launched in like Lysol in US, for example. So there are clearly challenges, right? And then it's very difficult to start a project, because what assumptions should I take into my business model? How many rotations? What should be the cannibalization of your old products, right? from the volume perspective. If you don't have a volume assumptions, it's very difficult to establish any business model or business plan. If you need to invest in your new product line or manufacturing lines, what is your payback? What is your return on investment? It depends on the volume. Which volume should I take? Consumer will tell you what will be the volume. So what will be the feedback from the consumers finally? So should we make a big investment or small investment? And you end up in a pilot, which is very, very small. Like literally 200 pieces per month, you know what I mean? So not 200,000 pieces, 200 pieces. And then you realize how many, what is the whole infrastructure to organize it, right? So it's a big challenge to start up those things. And again, I believe it's important to trial it. It's important to be ready, and it's important to know how to do it fast at a certain moment. And this dynamics is the most difficult one, because it will be the future. I believe it will be in the future. But if you do it too early, you may also make a big mistake, financially speaking, and which can drown your business. But if you are not ready for the right moment, you also can miss the opportunity. So piloting and trialing is a very important thing, and also being in touch with the consumers constantly to see what is the dynamics.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Yeah, I think that nobody would be under the any illusion that it's going to be an easy transition. But I think that resignation that it is the future, that we are going to need to be moving in that direction is probably right. Samantha, I saw earlier, I don't know where it is in the ranking now, a question in a similar vein directed at yourself and your closed loop case study, and why the furniture company wasn't reusing the packaging rather than bundling it up and sending it back to you to be reprocessed. Do you have an answer to that challenge? Because kind of in this same vein, I think is could they send it out again, or have you looked at that?
Well, I don't know the answer, I'll be honest and say. It's a very good point. I think it's quite interesting. I mean, packaging, corrugated packaging can be designed for reuse. Not all corrugated packaging is single trip packaging, but it's a tricky dilemma. It's not the same type of material as glass. It's not as hardy as cans. If you get it wet, it renders it useless. So, corrugated packaging is in a slightly different vein. So although it is seen as single trip, there are examples and there are business models where we do have reuse. So it's a very good question. I would have to go away and find out from the Cotswold company. It's very possible that they do that. But I guess it's a bulky item. It's probably fit for purpose to get it from A to B in a protective manner. And once it's all been ripped apart and pulled off the product, it's no longer fit for purpose. And I think then some of that goes back to perhaps the original design of, is there a way that it can be removed so it's protected and it can be reused? But we do find in a lot of situations where there's more sort of heavier goods involved, that often, the packaging serves its purpose, which ultimately as a secondary pack is to get your product safe from A to B. And if it's designed to do that, then that's what it will do. But it's a good point.
Well, and it may well be more of a question for the furniture company, because we're talking about doing yourselves out of business here, as opposed to, the responsibility for that may well sit elsewhere. Okay, we're rapidly running out of time. So I'm going to just ask for really quick answers. And sadly, our next most popular question is really not conducive to quick answer. But let's see what we can do this. So Sarah asks, how did you go about calculating the carbon impact of your packaging mixes? Now, I'm thinking, Krzysztof, your graphs were the most specific in talking about carbon footprints. So maybe we could go to you first, and then if Helen and Samantha want to comment quickly, go.
Yes. So we have internal tool which is called SIC or SIC, Sustainability Innovation Calculator, which is a a tool in which we can compare several different materials. So if you have 3 or 4 materials in the mix, you basically add them to the bill of material, and that gives you the score, right? So you have the proportions and times the indicators, and that's the CO2 impact, and that's the water impact before and after. That's your saving. That's very sort of a simple tool, but whenever we go externally, or we need to have a little bit more strategic confidence, then we go for LCA, and then we go for external life cycle assessments, and we also ask all the tiers in our value chain up the stream to provide, their energy consumption for the processes. Like the co-extrusion with multiple layers will have its energy consumption, right? Whether this is a lamination process, or this is a cast extrusion of 2 different layers, or extruded in one parizone from one extrusion head, 3 different processes, 3 different consumptions. So you might have 3 materials in the multi-layer structures, but using different processes, it will also add different energy profile that will result with the CO2. So basically, typically those institutes who are performing the life cycle assessments for you will get in touch with your supply chain to understand all the steps, manufacturing processes, and how all those materials have been originated.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Samantha, if you don't mind, unless you have something really different, I'm inclined to move on to the next one. We're all right with that? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We have a very similar process to Krzysztof.
Okay. Sheikley asks, what are your company strategies to do circular economy in developing countries that do not have proper waste management or recycling centers? Since the standards are different between the countries, will the company change their packaging globally? I'm thinking we're coming back to you, Krzysztof, with this one, if we may.
Well, this is a very interesting one. We steer towards having our global design guidelines. So design for circularity based on the most common techniques for recycling. Those techniques may not be available in every country, but this is used for our own indication of how well we can design, because that is in our control. It's very difficult to be responsible for lack of recycling infrastructure in developing countries, or in certain areas where you don't have collection, you don't have the sorting facilities. However, we are still a global company producing from global supply centers, right? So we design the packaging in a way it will be least complex to be produced. And so, for example, if we are speaking about monomaterials, polyethylene for flexibles, we still want to have it everywhere in the same spec, right? So even for the laminates in LATAM, or laminates in Indonesia, in India, maybe the collection is not there. Philippines, it's very bad, right? But we still want to have the same spec, being global spec, to drive the same sort of technical roadmap, and eventually the infrastructure will follow. We cannot have 5 specifications for 5 different regions as well. And that's another constraint. So hopefully there is a common ground for most of the technical recyclability challenges. So we map it out to make sure that we cover the most of it. You can never please everyone, but you can design it for the majority.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Okay, I know I shouldn't, but this last question, just Helen, you referred a couple of times, I think, to extended producer responsibility, and Richard's question would like to just really quickly put it out there, because I do need a few minutes at the end. 35 years ago, when Richard worked at Procter & Gamble, there was an intention for manufacturers to have to take back their packaging. When does this finally start to make sense for the big manufacturers? Are we there? How close are we to that?
So, so very briefly, take back services will only get us so far. So it's my view, it's got to be collected directly from people's houses. But take back services in terms of plastic film, where those services do not currently exist for people, are really critically important. And where you've got that critical mass of material, then I think that is where it makes sense, really.
Okay, and Samantha, you guys are already doing this with your closed loop system, so maybe we need to see more of that. Time's up. Sorry, that's such a ridiculously large number of questions going unanswered. I can only just say a huge thank you to the audience for being so engaged and giving us so much to work with. Thanks for all the votes and all the questions. Thanks, Krzysztof, Samantha, and Helen, for your fantastic contributions. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and really appreciate you being so generous with your knowledge and your time. As I mentioned at the outset, this is the fourth in a series. And so we would love to have you join us for the fifth session. The next one, we're going to be looking at the food and agriculture sector, where we'll be looking at how different stakeholders in the food and ag value chain can support more regenerative agricultural technologies, reduce food waste, and improve sourcing and ingredient selection to create a more circular and sustainable food and agriculture system. That's coming up on the 5th of April at the same time. Having registered for this session does not make you registered for that one. So if you're interested in that, there's a link in the chat, and do please sign up. And then the final session in the series, we're going to be looking at fashion and textiles on the 19th of April. So again, I really hope you'll be able to join us for that. Another session that I'm sure is going to be very, very interesting. Just a little more detail on the food session. We're going to be joined by, screen is, there we go, Danone, Tesco, Unilever, and Rabobank. So again, a super strong lineup of speakers, and hope you can join us. Be sure to visit our webpage. As I said, the link's in the chat. And finally, a survey is going to pop up at the end of the session. We'd really appreciate you taking just a couple of minutes to complete that. Your feedback is invaluable for helping us to keep on improving these sessions and make sure that we're giving you good value for the time you're spending with us. We've clicked over till 3:30 our time, so I'm going to say good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.